A black CEO was denied his first-class seat by policy, but 9 minutes later, he was the one running the entire flight. They thought denying him a seat would deny his worth. They didn't realize the man they brushed aside signed every paycheck that kept the plane flying. Subscribe if you believe dignity always finds its altitude. The ticket fluttered slightly in Elijah Corrin's hand as the airport's overhead vent pushed out a low hum of recycled air. He stood at the Haleworth International check-in counter, the synthetic light above casting a dull sheen across his polished navy blue shoes. The attendant behind the counter, young, pale, and chewing faintly on the inside of his cheek, barely looked up. "Name?" he asked without inflection, eyes already flicking back to his screen. "Elijah Corrin," Elijah said evenly, handing over the paper slip along with his ID. His voice was calm, deep, and measured, as if each word were weighed before release. He stood tall, the kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. A navy suit framed his lean frame with precision, his tie a muted silver stripe, his briefcase balanced precisely at his side. The attendant's fingers clicked across the keyboard. His name tag read Trevor Larn. Elijah noted it without comment. Trevor paused, frowned at the monitor, then glanced briefly at Elijah. "You've been reassigned to economy, sir." Elijah's brow furrowed, just slightly, not confusion, but a controlled surprise. "That can't be right. My ticket's for first class. A 12. Trevor didn't meet his gaze. "There's been a system update," he mumbled, tapping again with exaggerated boredom. "First class is full." A few feet away, the slow shuffle of a boarding line began. Elijah's eyes shifted briefly. A man in his 30s, white, wearing a casual linen shirt and untied boat shoes, was being handed a fresh boarding pass by another attendant. The man smiled, nodded, and tucked the slip into his pocket as he walked off, his seat clearly labeled, a 12. Elijah saw it. Trevor saw it. Neither said a word. There was a pause, thick, heavy. Elijah turned back, voice lower now. "That seat is mine." Trevor licked his lips, still not looking at him. "It's just a system thing. Happens sometimes." Elijah stared at him, eyes quiet but steady. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. Instead, he let the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to settle behind the counter. Behind him, two passengers glanced up. One of them nudged the other and whispered something. Wordless tension rippled outward. Still calm, Elijah exhaled slowly through his nose. "Just print the alternate boarding pass." Trevor hesitated, then nodded stiffly. His hands moved faster now, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps just to make the moment pass. The printer beside him whirred and spit out a new ticket. As he handed it over, his eyes briefly met Elijah's for the first time. There was something in them, something that flickered between shame and fear. Elijah took the pass without flinching. He looked down. Economy. Seat 27C. Aisle. As he turned to leave, the linen shirt man who now carried his seat smirked over his shoulder and said just loud enough to hear, "Guess it helps to know how to ask." Elijah's steps didn't break, but his eyes flicked to the man as he walked past. He didn't reply, not at first. He let the space fill, let the insult dangle unfinished. Then, with his hand already tightening around the handle of his briefcase, he said without turning, voice even and unhurried, "Sometimes, a delay reveals who's really flying the plane." The gate buzzed with static as the boarding announcement crackled through the loudspeakers. Elijah Corrin stood near the edge of the crowd, watching. A few feet away, the white man who'd taken his seat, Damon Rusk, tilted his head back in laughter, his voice loud enough to draw side eyes from other travelers. "All you gotta do is talk right," Damon said to the man beside him, nudging him with an elbow. "Act like you belong, and they upgrade you without even checking credentials." Elijah said nothing. His posture was upright, his face unreadable. But inside, something tightened, an old tension that had followed him through boardrooms, conferences, and country clubs. It wasn't the words that stung, but the casual confidence of entitlement. As if seats, ranks, and systems were negotiable for some but rigid for others. His phone buzzed. Jordan Vale. The board in Dravane won't wait past the hour. Elijah tapped back quickly. If they start without me, record it. The message sent, he slipped the phone back into his jacket and kept his eyes forward. Around him, passengers began queuing by zones, scanning their passes with robotic beeps. But something shifted in the air as Trevor Larn stepped to the center of the gate. The same young attendant who had denied Elijah's seat now held up a hand, halting the line with a quick glance toward the ceiling speaker and a finger to his earpiece. "He's on the list," Trevor muttered, barely audible. Elijah's eyes narrowed. The words sounded routine, but the cadence, the glance over his shoulder, the way two uniformed security officers immediately leaned in and whispered to one another, it all suggested something else. Not a procedural note, a marker. Otog. The kind of phrase meant to confirm not a booking, but a presence. As Trevor stepped aside, Elijah walked slowly down the jet bridge. His movements were deliberate, not hesitant, but measured, like a man trained to read atmospheres rather than appearances. A rush of cool air met him halfway down the tunnel, and with it, a strange weight pressing at the edges of his perception. It wasn't paranoia. It was precision, the sense that this moment had been arranged. Inside the plane, fluorescent lights hummed as passengers stowed bags and settled into their seats. Elijah moved through the narrow aisle, scanning the seat numbers with a calm detachment. He passed the first-class row, where the white man from earlier was already reclining in A12, Elijah's seat. Damon didn't even look his way. He simply adjusted his seatbelt and continued speaking into his phone, his voice now a murmur. Elijah continued past him, the irony thick in every step, past business class through the curtain into economy. There, toward the rear of the aircraft, he found the seat assigned on his reprinted boarding pass, 32B. Aisle, close to the restroom, the kind of seat travelers accepted when their choices were taken from them. A male flight attendant, mid-40s, clean-shaven, with thinning blonde hair, glanced up as Elijah approached. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his tone neither warm nor hostile, just vaguely suspicious. 32B, Elijah said, lifting his ticket slightly. The attendant looked at it, then looked at him. There was a flicker of something behind his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or simply bias dressed in confusion. He stepped aside wordlessly, allowing Elijah to sit. Elijah lowered himself into the narrow seat, knees brushing the tray table ahead, shoulder bumping the armrest. Across the aisle, a young man in a hoodie glanced at him, then returned to his earbuds. Behind him, a child was already kicking the back of his seat in steady rhythm. Beside him, the lavatory door let out a mechanical squeak as someone exited. He exhaled slowly, settling in. The man who designed the flight logistics system for half the country now sat crammed beside the bathroom of an airline that used his very blueprint. He had optimized this boarding pattern, designed these seat flow models, calculated the passenger satisfaction curves that this exact airline had adopted. And yet, here he was, flattened into 32B. He closed his eyes for a moment, not in resignation but in recognition. This wasn't an accident. It had all the hallmarks of coordination, familiar phrases, suspicious glances, misdirected authority. He'd seen corporate power plays dressed as casual delays before. He leaned his head slightly against the headrest, allowing the low hum of the cabin to fill his ears. A voice echoed inside him, steady and quiet, as if spoken from some deeper place that had endured far worse. Every system shows its flaws when it meets its maker. The man in Elijah Corrin's rightful first-class seat threw his head back and laughed, the sound cutting through the soft hum of the cabin like a jagged knife. Elijah sat 5 rows behind, crammed against the narrow economy window near the lavatory. His knees pressed uncomfortably against the back of the seat in front of him. He was pretending to scroll through a travel magazine, but his eyes locked sharply onto the conversation unfolding ahead. "Helion Dynamics," the man was saying, with the casual arrogance of someone convinced no one around him mattered. "The board's weak. Their leadership's worse. I mean, who runs a company like that and still expects to keep a chair at the table?" Elijah's breath slowed, his muscles tightening. Helion Dynamics. His company. His legacy. The name hadn't just been dropped, it had been hurled like a weapon. The speaker, a middle-aged man in a designer blazer and spotless loafers, leaned toward the passenger beside him, oblivious to who might be listening. Honestly, the takeover was inevitable. The CEO's got no control over the board anymore. I'll have the whole operation under my wing before landing. Damon Rusk. Elijah recognized him now not just by face, but by the voice. He was a tech investor known for hostile acquisitions, someone who made fortunes by dismantling companies and selling them in parts. Elijah's lips tightened into a barely perceptible line. This wasn't random. This wasn't bad luck. This was a coordinated strike. He slowly reached into his carry-on bag and retrieved his tablet. The screen lit up silently under the dim overhead light, reflecting off his glasses. He enabled the encrypted offline mode, an emergency access point he had built years ago for secure data review during travel. His fingers moved with precision, bypassing unnecessary interfaces, tunneling straight into Helion's executive access logs. If what he suspected was true, the betrayal had started long before he reached the airport. Rows of digital entries scrolled past. Board meeting schedules, security authorizations, legal contracts. He filtered by recent activity, then paused. One name surfaced repeatedly in recent back-end communications. Trevor Larn. Elijah blinked once. Trevor. He was the gate attendant who had denied him his seat. A routine role, low-level. Except Trevor's signature was tied to a logistics evaluation contract issued just days ago. He tapped further. The contract was processed through a shell company, Braylock Transit Services, whose parent firm was known to funnel quiet acquisitions on behalf of Rusk Holdings. Elijah's jaw flexed. Trevor had been paid. Not just in salary, in silence. And that meant this wasn't just about humiliating him. It was about isolating him, stripping him of authority, discrediting him in front of key passengers, and ensuring that any resistance would look like paranoia. The perfect narrative. A displaced CEO, seated beside a lavatory, while his empire was quietly handed to vultures. But as Elijah's gaze drifted downward, something caught his eye. A small latch beneath the seat, subtle, metallic. He remembered its design. In fact, he had signed off on it. Years ago, during a cross-collaboration project with this very airline, he'd helped implement a secondary diagnostics port beneath certain economy rows, a fail-safe network connection built for maintenance during flight. A feature most forgot existed. He hadn't, and now neither had fate. He slid a small adapter from his pen case. It looked like an ordinary stylus, but unscrewed at one end to reveal a custom microconnector. With one smooth motion, he reached down, lifted the latch, and plugged the adapter into the port. A soft click followed by a silent LED glow confirmed the connection. His tablet blinked. Internal cabin network detected. It wasn't full Wi-Fi, but it was enough to ride the thin lifeline between the plane and the airline's internal relay hub. Enough to trace signals. Enough to intercept. He lowered the tablet onto his tray and began navigating the inner web of the airline's communications grid. The layout was familiar, almost nostalgic. Here was a dashboard he had once helped design for operational integrity. Now he was using it to expose corruption. New notifications poured in. A folder named Acquisition Clearance. Helion pinged open. Inside, authorization forms, digitally signed, 3 of them from board members Elijah once trusted like family. He read each line, each name, each timestamp. Then he found it. The forms had been pre-authorized 9 minutes before his flight even left the gate. Not after he boarded. Before. He sat back, tablet resting against the seatback tray, the cabin noise receding into a distant hum. The smirking investor ahead of him continued talking, oblivious that the man he mocked was now directly behind him, silent, steady, and now fully aware. The switch in seating was no clerical mistake. It was a chess move, an attempt to remove him from proximity to in-flight Wi-Fi, preventing him from blocking the signatures. A well-timed insult disguised as logistics. They assumed he'd be disconnected. But in giving him this seat, they had handed him proximity to the very artery that pulsed beneath the cabin. Elijah narrowed his eyes as new layers of digital structure opened before him. In a world run by systems, only the architect knew where to walk without setting off alarms. And he was the architect. Above the seat in front of him, a small reflection revealed the faint outline of his own expression, calm, unreadable, but focused like steel pulled through fire. "They think they grounded me," Elijah murmured, voice low, barely audible. "They just gave me access to the cockpit." While the cabin buzzed with idle conversation, Elijah leaned forward slightly in his seat, his hand calmly reaching into the pen case beside his tablet. From within its padded lining, he retrieved a slim adapter no longer than a finger, black, brushed metal, and unmarked. He slipped it into the edge port of his tablet with practiced ease. The click was faint beneath the ambient hum of the jet's engines and the chatter around him. No one noticed. No one was supposed to. A green icon blinked on the corner of his screen. Connection stabilized. The data port beneath the seat wasn't common knowledge. Years ago, Elijah had designed it himself, an overlooked redundancy in the airline's original flight tracking model, built in case of satellite relay failure. It had been shelved during development due to budget concerns, yet some prototypes made it into circulation. Elijah had always kept track of where they ended up. Apparently, this flight was one of them. The irony stirred something close to a smirk on his face, but it vanished quickly. There was no time for satisfaction, not yet. His fingers moved swiftly across the screen, bypassing firewalls he had authored himself. Within seconds, the connection tunneled through the onboard node into the airline's internal network. The interface was familiar, though parts had changed since he'd last been involved directly. He navigated through encrypted directories, tracing signals back to the airline's corporate data hub in Dravane. Then he found it, a freshly created file, time-stamped within the last hour. His name, acquisition clearance, Helion. Elijah's eyes narrowed. He opened the document slowly, almost afraid of what he'd see, but prepared nonetheless. The form contained full digital approval of the Helion Dynamics acquisition. The signatures at the bottom stopped his breath for a second. 3 names, all of them men he had mentored, trusted board members who once called him a brother in vision. Each one had signed off on the transaction. But something wasn't right. Elijah tapped into the metadata, combing through the layers like an archaeologist brushing dust from a ruin. There, buried beneath security layers, lay the detail that sealed it all. The file had been pre-authorized exactly 9 minutes before his flight was scheduled to depart. His pulse slowed, even as the fury underneath it began to simmer. So that's why they moved him. They didn't just want to insult him publicly by bumping him from his seat. They needed him off the grid, outside the range of live Wi-Fi or protected enterprise VPN, just long enough for the transaction to pass silently. They calculated it down to the minute. He stared at the signatures again. It wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. But they underestimated the man they tried to box in. His hands steady, Elijah began embedding a countersignature. Not one that would trigger alarms, not immediately. This override would nest quietly within the document's code, initiating a delay of 48 hours on all board-approved transactions involving Helion Dynamics assets. It was a subtle legal deceleration protocol, something most executives forgot even existed, and he had full authority to invoke it. Once it embedded, he ran an integrity checksum. No flags. It was in. Now, for the second strike. He opened a separate interface, an encrypted channel leading to the Federal Market Authority's oversight relay. A rarely used protocol allowed certain board-certified founders to initiate an asset protection audit in times of internal breach. Elijah input the access token, an 8-digit biometric sequence stored only on his device. A soft ping confirmed its activation. Instantly, a background sweep would begin across all Helion-linked transactions, pausing any movement of shares or funds until further review. The entire acquisition would grind to a halt before it ever reached the finish line. He exhaled slowly, not from relief but from resolve. What they intended as humiliation had given him the only thing he needed: time and access. He looked up. Across the aisle, passengers continued their conversations, oblivious. A young man 2 rows up was watching a movie. A father in the back was rocking a fussy toddler. Damon Rusk remained in the first-class section, no doubt believing he'd already won. And Trevor, the attendant who denied him at the gate, was now preparing drink trays, completely unaware that the balance of power had shifted. Elijah flexed his hand and closed the tablet gently, letting the screen fade to black. The seatbelt sign glowed faintly above, casting a warm halo over the cabin aisle. Outside the window, clouds swirled beneath them like smoke on glass. Inside him, the storm was controlled, focused. He didn't rage, didn't lash out. His moves were precise, surgical. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming the seat they thought they had taken. He straightened his posture and let the hum of the engines settle into the background. They had tried to sideline him. They thought isolating him midair would keep him blind. But they forgot one simple truth. He was the one who built the system they were using, and now he was inside it. He glanced up at the glowing seatbelt sign and thought, altitude rising. So is the balance of power. The turbulence hit without warning. A sudden jolt rocked the plane, snapping overhead compartments and tossing half-filled cups into laps. Damon Rusk cursed sharply as his glass of sparkling water tipped, drenching the sleeve of his linen blazer. He fumbled with a napkin, his polished comm cracking for the first time since takeoff. Just behind him, Trevor Larn, the same gate attendant who had denied Elijah his seat and was now awkwardly posing as an onboard crew member, hurried down the aisle with a tray of drinks and a forced smile. Another jolt. Trevor lost his footing, stumbling into the edge of a service cart with a clatter. The cart slammed sideways into Damon's seat. A thin metal folder resting on Damon's lap tumbled down, spilling its contents across the narrow aisle like autumn leaves caught in a gust of wind. Most of the passengers barely noticed, too busy adjusting their seatbelts or holding their drinks steady. But Elijah saw everything. One sheet slid beneath his shoe. It was printed on firm, ivory-tinted paper and stamped across the top in dark red ink. Confidential, transfer of ownership. Elijah's eyes narrowed. He didn't move at first. He just stared at the paper, as if recognizing the shape of a storm before it hits. Then, calmly, precisely, he reached down, picked it up, and scanned it in a single, practiced motion. Damon had already turned around, eyes wide with panic, and lunged toward the aisle. "Give me that," he snapped, his voice sharp under forced politeness. But Elijah was quicker. He folded the paper with the careful exactness of a banker preserving a bond, and without a word, slid it into the side compartment of his briefcase. The lock clicked. Only then did he meet Damon's stare, level, unblinking, like a man who had just recognized the coordinates of a trap he was never supposed to escape from. "Seems like turbulence reveals more than clouds," Elijah said evenly, his tone smooth as stone. A few passengers chuckled, thinking it a harmless exchange between business rivals. But beneath that moment lay a battle few understood, one being fought not with fists or threats, but with documents, networks, and precision timing. Damon's face twitched, his practiced smirk wavered, and for a second, the mask fell. He leaned closer, voice low and biting. "You're finished when we land." Elijah didn't flinch. His reply came like the quiet turn of a key in a locked door. "I've already landed where it matters." For a moment, everything stilled. The cabin noise returned, a baby fussing 2 rows back, the soft hiss of airflow, the shuffle of feet in the aisle. But for the two men facing off across a sliver of carpet and corporate betrayal, the plane felt like a courtroom, and the verdict had already been handed down. Damon straightened, forcing confidence into his posture, but his hands betrayed him, twitching slightly as he reached for another document. He didn't speak again. Elijah remained seated, his gaze shifting back to his tablet, where the progress bar for his background sync continued its slow climb. The turbulence had passed, but something more permanent had shifted in the air. Trevor returned moments later, whispering apologies as he crouched to gather the remaining pages. He dared a glance at Elijah, brief, uncertain, but said nothing. Elijah didn't need words from him. He had already seen what mattered. The fear in Damon's eyes, the silence of a man whose plan had just been exposed at 30,000 feet. As the plane steadied into its cruising altitude, Elijah leaned back in his seat. He felt no triumph, only resolve. The paper now secured in his briefcase wasn't just evidence, it was leverage. The kind of leverage that didn't need a raised voice or public confrontation. It was the quiet kind that rewrote stories mid-flight. He adjusted his tie, breathing evenly, his mind already calculating the next move. There would be fallout. There always was. But this time it wouldn't be his. Damon had opened a door. Elijah had simply walked through it and locked it behind him. 9 minutes later, at 30,000 feet, Elijah Corrin was no longer the man denied a seat. He was the man rewriting ownership rights in real time. Power, he whispered, doesn't need permission to board. The cursor on Elijah's screen blinked once. Then again. A faint hum from beneath his seat told him the adapter had locked in. The connection had stabilized. He didn't move a muscle. A flight attendant rolled past with a drink cart, the clinking of glasses disguising the soft chime that confirmed access to the satellite relay. Elijah's fingers resumed their silent dance across the tablet. Data cascaded down the screen, rows of authorization tokens, timestamps, and encrypted clearance logs linked directly to Helion Dynamics executive systems. The network's architecture was familiar. He had helped design its communication redundancy during the company's expansion phase. What no one on this flight realized, not even those who'd plotted his downfall, was that Elijah Corrin was seated inside the very machine they thought they controlled. And he had just stepped into its cockpit. He tunneled through Helion's satellite communications node. One of the network's executive access ports had been synced to authorize board-level takeovers remotely, something the acquisition team had hoped would go unnoticed until it was too late. But as Elijah rerouted signal pathways through encrypted tunnels, the system began responding not to Rusk's credentials, but to his. One by one, the takeover logs Damon Rusk had submitted began flashing red. Invalid certificate. Key expired. Audit required. Elijah didn't delete them. That would be noisy. Predictable. Instead, he rewrote the internal logic of the clearance protocol. Every attempt Rusk made to push the acquisition forward would now trigger an automated alert sent directly to the Financial Oversight Bureau, an agency known for freezing entire corporations when even the hint of irregularity appeared. This wasn't sabotage. It was self-defense written in code. Across the cabin, Damon Rusk's face twitched. He tapped his phone's screen, expecting confirmation of his final ownership claim. Instead, the interface lagged, then displayed a gray box. Session timed out. Re-authenticate. His thumb hovered uncertainly over the retry button. "What is this?" he muttered, eyes narrowing. From the galley, Trevor leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Sir, do you think he knows?" Rusk didn't look at him. His jaw tightened. "He's in economy," he replied through clenched teeth. "Let him rot there." Elijah heard every word. The tone, the venom, the certainty. It didn't offend him, it clarified the stakes. Rusk still believed Elijah was where he had placed him. Confined, humiliated, irrelevant. But Elijah wasn't in economy. He was inside the bloodstream of the company, injecting an antidote to betrayal. The man next to him stirred slightly, glancing at Elijah's screen, but saw only a row of graphs and weather patterns. Harmless. Elijah tilted the tablet just enough to obscure it from view, then whispered to himself, "Come on, activate." A soft vibration answered him. The satellite relay had accepted the override key. Outside the window, clouds thinned, revealing a lattice of city lights below, blinking like old signals waiting to be interpreted. Elijah's thoughts moved faster than the aircraft, mapping each outcome, each board member's vote, each delay tactic. He wasn't simply regaining control. He was building a firewall around the company's future. Trevor walked down the aisle again, slower this time. His earlier confidence had cracked. He paused at Elijah's row but didn't speak. Elijah glanced up. "You all right?" he asked calmly, voice smooth but edged with something deeper. Trevor nodded quickly, then hurried past without replying. The power dynamic had shifted, but no one on board understood how fast it had happened. Elijah tapped into the secondary server and queued a secondary script. This one would monitor all outgoing financial operations tied to Helion's corporate shell accounts. Any movement flagged as related to asset repositioning would now reroute to internal audit rather than proceed. It was elegant, silent, but devastating. He stared at the progress bar climbing upward. 84%, 92%. When it hit 100%, he exhaled once, deeply. The weight in his chest loosened, not from relief, but from the sheer focus he had carried since the moment Trevor said, "First class is full." Across the aisle, Damon Rusk's artificial grin returned, forced and shallow. He leaned to whisper something to another man in a blazer who had boarded with him. But the connection was gone. His plans, already tangled, were now crumbling. Elijah's screen lit with the final confirmation. Board action delayed, oversight notification confirmed. The plane hummed beneath him, indifferent to the battle taking place midair. Elijah shut the tablet softly, folding the cover with care, as though sealing away a finished symphony. He rested his head against the seat and closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to steady his thoughts for what came next. Rusk had tried to ground him. Instead, he had given Elijah the one tool no boardroom could block: time inside the machine. The cabin dimmed as the aircraft cruised through thinner air. No one applauded. No one noticed. But somewhere across Helion's internal servers, flags were lighting up like runway lights on a foggy night. And Elijah Corrin, in economy seat 34C, whispered beneath the hum of flight, "Altitude equalizes everyone who flies too high." An alert lit up the executive dashboard at Helion Dynamics headquarters. Board override detected. Administrative lockdown initiated. Inside the sleek boardroom in Dravane City, tension snapped like a power line in a storm. 3 men stood up at once, knocking over chairs. Jordan Vale, Elijah's assistant, stared at the blinking red message on the screen with wide eyes. For a moment, no one moved. Then Jordan calmly tapped the camera icon on his tablet. With a practiced motion, he swiveled it toward the board table and pressed record. The live stream began instantly, broadcasting the chaos to every shareholder tuned into the emergency meeting. "What is this?" barked Chairman Rourke, gripping the sides of the table as if it might anchor him. "How is his name back on the CEO registry?" "Elijah Corrin," mumbled Director Vance, eyes locked on the display that now read, "Active Chief Executive Officer, Elijah Corrin." "No, this wasn't supposed to happen," whispered another board member, palms sweating. But it was happening. Tens of thousands of feet above them, aboard Flight Ardent 417, Elijah sat quietly in seat 32C, head down, eyes steady, tablet closed beside him like a sealed vault. From the outside, he appeared to be nothing more than a reserved man adjusting to a cramped economy seat. But beneath that calm exterior, the tides of a corporate empire were shifting, digitally, surgically, irreversibly. Across the aisle, Damon Rusk was pacing. His shirt collar, once crisp, was now damp with sweat. His fingers jabbed at his phone again and again. "Still nothing," he muttered, jaw tightening. "Signal jammed. What kind of airline runs a single-port node without backup redundancy?" He didn't know that Elijah had done exactly that, redirected the bandwidth mid-flight, reprioritizing all network traffic through his own encrypted access point. Not illegal, just intelligent. As Damon moved toward the front cabin again, fuming under his breath, Elijah watched him in silence. Each footstep Rusk took felt like a tremor, not from turbulence, but from failing control. His swagger had turned into pacing, his smirk into clenched silence. Trevor Larn passed by then, pushing the service cart with stiff hands. His earlier confidence had dissolved into a series of nervous glances and forced professionalism. Elijah raised a hand calmly. "Could I have some water, please?" Trevor hesitated. His eyes met Elijah's for the first time that flight, and the guilt behind them was immediate, raw, and clumsy. He reached for a bottle, fumbled slightly, and handed it over without a word. "Rough day?" Elijah asked softly, his voice free of sarcasm but heavy with knowing. Trevor nodded once, the movement brief, apologetic. You'll want to sit down soon, Elijah added as he twisted the cap off the bottle. It's about to get rougher. Trevor blinked, as if unsure whether it was a warning or a promise, then moved on. The moment passed, but its weight lingered in the aisle like unspoken truth. Elijah placed the bottle beside him and reached for his tablet again. Not to type, but to close it entirely. He had already executed the final command before speaking to Trevor. There was no need for dramatics, just quiet confirmation. The lights inside the cabin dimmed a moment later, flickering subtly as the plane entered a thick bank of clouds. Outside, the world disappeared into gray. Inside, an empire cracked in silence. Below, at Helion's headquarters, panic rippled through the chain of command. Authentication servers were flagging anomalies. Rusk's transaction history triggered automatic verification alerts. Boardroom devices were being logged out, one by one. Remote control revoked. Votes suspended. Elijah hadn't simply blocked them. He had reprogrammed the system to require biometric two-key authentication, a safeguard he'd quietly drafted months ago but never activated. Until now. Rusk returned to his seat like a man who had walked into a locked vault. He pulled out his phone again, trying a different connection. Nothing. Still nothing. He muttered to himself and tapped on his screen furiously, failing to notice the subtle reroute symbol in the corner. He was no longer the signal's priority. He was its passenger. Back in seat 32C, Elijah closed his eyes briefly. Not out of fatigue but focus. He could almost hear the gears turning below him. Digital locks engaging, audit flags unfurling, firewalls rising around the company he built with sleepless nights and relentless clarity. He opened his eyes, staring straight ahead as if looking through the fuselage and down into the city below. 9 minutes ago, he thought, they took my seat. Now I own the runway. He was told, you don't belong here, as others watched in silence. If you believe power isn't about where you sit but what you've built, hit subscribe now. Because true leadership doesn't need permission, it needs principle. Suddenly, a tone sounded from the cockpit intercom, crisp and unmistakable. This is your captain speaking. We've been asked to maintain a holding pattern due to network congestion at Dravatn Hub. The announcement echoed through the cabin, drawing immediate murmurs from passengers and a few confused glances toward the windows. A couple of travelers near the front exchanged puzzled looks. The word congestion seemed odd. There had been no weather warnings, no delays mentioned at departure. But to Elijah Corrin, seated near the back, there was no confusion, only confirmation. He leaned back in his seat slowly, resting his head against the vinyl cushion. The hum of the aircraft deepened as it began a wide, gentle bank, entering the designated circular pattern above Dravatn. His fingers, poised above the keyboard of his tablet, relaxed as the final command executed behind the glowing screen. The system freeze he had initiated earlier, an emergency override embedded within the very infrastructure his company helped build, had done its job. What was meant to be a silent act of sabotage against him had now backfired on the entire corporate network Rusk had relied on. Elijah's grip tightened slightly around his stylus. The very skies were now echoing his resistance. Just rows ahead, Damon Rusk's hand shot up, snapping his fingers for the attendant like a man summoning a subordinate. Trevor Larn, now clearly sweating beneath his collar despite the air conditioning, approached hesitantly. Damon leaned in, his voice low and sharp. Get the pilot on the line. Tell him to land. Now. Trevor blinked, startled. Sir, we can't alter flight commands from the cabin. It's automated once we're in a holding pattern. I don't care, Damon hissed, his eyes wild with realization. This delay, it's not congestion. It's him. He's doing this. Trevor's gaze flicked backward toward Elijah, who now seemed almost serene in his stillness, the soft tap of his stylus the only movement. Sir, I don't think there's anything I can. Then get out of my sight, Damon snapped, shoving past Trevor and nearly stumbling into the aisle. Elijah's eyes slowly lifted. Across the cabin, his gaze locked with Rusk's, unflinching and unreadable. A long silence stretched between them, unbroken by the soft hiss of the air vents and the distant roar of turbines. The atmosphere inside the plane had shifted. It was no longer the indifferent calm of a routine flight. It was the quiet tension before a reckoning. Damon's lips curled into a snarl. "You think this will save you?" he growled under his breath, barely loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. Elijah offered no reaction. He simply turned back to his tablet, swiping to a diagnostic screen showing network freeze confirmations across multiple nodes. All of them now read the same: locked, transaction blocked, audit trigger engaged. Back at the front of the cabin, a passenger asked a flight attendant, "Are we landing soon?" "Sorry, sir." The attendant replied, nervous and flustered. "Just a short delay. Air traffic control says it's congestion." But Damon knew the truth, and so did Elijah. What had once been a quiet humiliation, being stripped of his seat, pushed to the back, dismissed without a word, had now become a turning point. This wasn't turbulence. This was precision. It was justice rendered through circuitry and calm resolve. Elijah allowed himself a small exhale. Not a smirk, not a grin, just a breath of stillness. The kind that comes when a man knows the balance of power has shifted and there's no need to declare it aloud. The screen before him displayed the final progress bar. Crept forward, second by second, before filling completely with a soft tone. Lockout complete. He reached up and adjusted the collar of his shirt, still immaculate despite hours in cramped seating. Then, as if simply making an observation to the air itself, Elijah spoke, his voice quiet but unmistakably deliberate. "Funny thing about altitude, it amplifies consequences." The seatbelt sign blinked on with a faint chime as the cabin lights brightened. Flight attendants moved with quiet urgency, collecting trays and checking overhead compartments. Amid the orchestrated descent routine, Trevor stepped forward from the galley. His posture was stiff, hesitant, as if walking through invisible resistance. Elijah noticed him approaching and met his gaze calmly. "Sir, about earlier, I was told by corporate to—" Trevor began, his voice low, almost swallowed by the hum of the engines. Elijah didn't let him finish. He raised one hand gently, not in dismissal but in understanding. His tone was calm, deliberate. "You followed orders," he said. "Sometimes we all board the wrong instruction." Trevor blinked, throat tight, the burden of complicity etched into his features. His uniform, once pressed and confident, now looked rumpled under the weight of guilt. "I didn't know who you were," Trevor admitted, voice cracking. Elijah gave a faint smile, not triumphant, not bitter, just tired. "You didn't have to. Respect isn't earned by title. It's revealed by choice." Trevor stood still for a beat longer, then nodded silently and stepped back, retreating into the quiet blur of crew movement. The air between them hung heavy with unspoken consequences, of systems obeyed too blindly, of moments misjudged. Several rows ahead, Damon Rusk shifted in his seat. His skin glistened with a sheen of sweat that had nothing to do with the cabin temperature. The hum of the engines felt louder now, like a pressure building around him. His phone buzzed sharply, the vibration harsh against his leg. He yanked it from his pocket, hoping for resolution. But the screen showed only 5 words. Transaction reversed. Audit inquiry pending. His heart thudded. The smug certainty he'd worn all flight drained from his face. His lips parted slightly, as if trying to breathe through the realization, but nothing came out. He stood abruptly, panic rising like heat. The plane dipped slightly as it entered descent. Outside the window, clouds streaked past in blurred streaks of silver and ash. Damon stumbled a step forward, eyes locked on Elijah, desperation replacing his earlier arrogance. "You don't understand what you've done," he muttered, trying to push past the aisle. "I need to speak to him. Now." But just as he moved, the chime repeated, seatbelt sign on, and a flight attendant stepped smoothly into his path. His arm extended across the aisle, calm but firm. "Sir, please return to your seat," the attendant said. "We're descending." "I need 5 seconds," Damon snapped. Elijah didn't even turn. He was already fastening his belt, smooth and silent. His gaze was steady, fixed on the seat back ahead, as if watching something no one else could see. The tension outside mirrored the storm coiling beneath the surface, air pressure dropping, expectations crashing. Trevor hovered near the galley, still watching the confrontation with tight hands and an expression caught between dread and duty. Damon's fingers clenched into fists. His mouth opened, then shut again. No one was listening now. No one was moving on his command. He was no longer a man of influence aboard this plane. He was a passenger bound to gravity like the rest of them. Elijah shifted slightly in his seat, the leather creaking beneath him. He didn't look at Damon. He didn't need to. The balance had already tilted. The turbulence outside, Elijah thought, is nothing compared to the one waiting below. A faint shudder passed through the aircraft as the wheels extended, invisible but felt. Elijah exhaled slowly, letting the silence do what words could not. He could feel the reversal cementing, not with noise, but with stillness. It was no longer a battle for control, it was the confirmation of it. He glanced sideways at the window. Clouds peeled back, revealing a faint glimpse of city lights through the dusk. Then he looked straight ahead again, eyes calm, heart unshaken, thoughts moving miles ahead of the descending jet. I gave them a window seat, he thought, and they never saw the storm forming behind it. The wheels of the aircraft struck the wet runway with a muted thud, sending a soft jolt through the cabin. Outside, streaks of rain lashed the tarmac beneath thick silver clouds, casting a solemn hush over the scene. The engines roared in deceleration, and the faint clapping of a few polite passengers rippled through the aisles, an ordinary applause for what had been, to them, an ordinary flight. But for Elijah Corrin, nothing about the descent was ordinary. He remained still in his seat, his expression composed, his hands folded over the leather strap of his briefcase. His phone vibrated once. He reached for it with calm precision, unlocking it with his thumbprint. The message was brief, but it struck like a bell in a cathedral. Audit complete. You're reinstated. Jordan. The corners of his mouth barely moved, but something in his shoulders shifted, something subtle, like the release of a coiled spring. He exhaled slowly, as if letting go of 9 minutes of injustice that had tried to rewrite his place in the world. The moment he stood, the cabin felt tighter. From first class, Damon Rusk unbuckled and stormed toward the aisle with sharp, mechanical steps. His voice, once coated in smug confidence, now cracked beneath forced control. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his jaw locked, fingers twitching with restrained fury. Elijah turned to face him. His eyes, unblinking, met Rusk's like steel against frost. "I already did, for 9 minutes," he said, voice quiet but unshakably firm. Rusk's face blanched. The words hit with precision, not loud, not violent, but heavy with the kind of weight that cannot be lifted. At the front of the aircraft, movement stirred. 2 men in dark uniforms stepped onto the jet bridge. Airport security. Their walk was purposeful, their eyes scanning the manifest. They didn't glance at Elijah. They didn't have to. Their focus locked directly on Rusk. "Mr. Damon Rusk?" one officer asked, holding up a federal audit alert clipped to a data tablet. Rusk's bravado evaporated. "There must be a mistake," he said quickly, his voice rising a note higher. "I'm a passenger." "Sir, we need you to come with us," the officer interrupted, calm but unwavering. Passengers nearby turned to watch, sensing that something unusual was unfolding but too unsure to ask questions. Trevor Larn, the once arrogant attendant who had demoted Elijah to economy, stood frozen just outside the galley. His eyes shifted rapidly between Rusk and the officers, panic surfacing as he realized the dominoes were falling in the opposite direction now. Rusk resisted instinctively, raising his hands. "I demand to know." "Sir," the second officer said, a little more firmly, "we're executing a federal compliance order. You'll be briefed further at the terminal." As they gently but firmly guided Rusk away, his glare returned to Elijah, now stripped of power, now silent, now walking out not as a conqueror but as a man cornered by the very system he tried to exploit. Elijah didn't move until the aisle cleared. He stepped into it, adjusting his cuff links with the quiet control of a man who had already made peace with turbulence. As he reached the front of the aircraft, he paused beside the seat he had been denied. First class A12. Empty now. Neatly tucked pillows. A forgotten glass of melted ice water beside a sealed snack tray. He looked at it for a long moment, then said aloud, barely more than a whisper, "Comfort fades fast." His voice lingered like condensation on glass. "But consequence flies first class." He turned and stepped into the jet bridge. The scent of jet fuel and damp concrete greeted him like an old memory. The rain had begun to ease, but the clouds still held weight. At the threshold, the pilot stood by the open cockpit door, a middle-aged man with streaks of silver at his temples and a kind, unreadable face. "Thank you for flying with us, sir," the captain said, offering a crisp nod. Elijah returned it, calm and measured. Then he walked on, past the gate, past the seats, past the humiliation. Each step forward was no longer about the injustice he endured, but the leverage he had forged from it. He wasn't just the CEO anymore. He was the man who turned humiliation into leverage. Power, he thought, isn't in the seat. It's in how you rise after being denied one. Flashes popped the moment Elijah Corrin stepped out of the terminal doors. The air was thick with humidity and voices, shouts from reporters, murmurs from onlookers, and the low growl of idling engines just beyond the security barrier. He didn't flinch. His polished shoes hit the wet pavement with calm certainty, his stride deliberate, unwavering, as if the chaos that now surrounded him was nothing more than a gust of wind trying to bend steel. Around him, the crowd surged. "Mr. Corrin, is it true you reversed a hostile takeover midair? Did Damon Rusk really lose control from seat 2A? Elijah, was this retaliation or strategy?" He didn't answer. He didn't slow. He simply adjusted his grip on the briefcase and kept walking, eyes ahead, posture upright. There was no smugness, only focus, the same composure that had held during those decisive 9 minutes above the clouds. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. The door swung open and Jordan Vale stepped out, shielding his tablet from the rain with a folded newspaper. His face was taut, a strange mixture of awe and urgency. "They're calling it the 9-minute takeback," Jordan said, holding the screen for Elijah to see. Notifications blinked across the display in rapid succession. Federal audit acknowledged. Helion Dynamics trading suspended. Shareholder alert. DOJ request pending interview. Media outlets had already begun publishing articles with headlines that bordered on cinematic. Elijah didn't even glance at the screen. "Let them call it what they like," he replied, slipping into the car. "What matters is the truth behind it." The door closed, sealing them into a silence broken only by the soft purr of the engine and the rhythm of rain tapping on the windows. Outside, the reporters kept shouting, but the vehicle slid smoothly away from the curb, past a security barricade and into the pulsing city beyond. Elijah exhaled slowly, the seat leather cool against his back. His thoughts replayed the cabin, the confrontation, the turbulence, not of air, but of intent. Those 9 minutes were not about revenge. They had been revelation. The hands that once pretended to support him had reached for the levers of betrayal instead. And now he knew exactly who they were. Jordan glanced over, hesitant. "You want me to start the security review?" Elijah nodded once. "Yes, but first?" He reached into his breast pocket and handed Jordan a folded document. Confidential, transfer of ownership, the same one he had plucked from beneath Damon Rusk's panicked hands. "This goes to the Federal Compliance Registry. Let them see how deep this thing runs." Jordan opened it and whistled low. "It's signed by 3 board members, Barrick, Hennel, and Drex. All of them vouched for you just 2 weeks ago." "They lied to my face," Elijah said. His voice didn't tremble, but there was weight in every syllable. "And now they'll explain that signature under oath." He tapped the window lightly, watching the raindrops streak across the glass like falling stock prices. The skyline of Dravane City came into view, towering steel and mirrored glass disappearing into gray mist. Somewhere inside one of those buildings, his enemies were scrambling, shredding documents, calling attorneys, bracing for impact. Elijah, Jordan's voice softened. What do you want to do next? Call the shareholders, Elijah said. Emergency conference. Tonight. Jordan blinked. Tonight. Elijah looked at him with that same unshakable gaze he had worn through turbulence and betrayal. Transparency is the only armor worth wearing. Jordan nodded, already typing. Understood. I'll send the notice in 10. The car curved toward the expressway. Headlights blurred through mist. The rhythm of the windshield wipers clicked like a metronome marking time between truth and consequences. Elijah leaned back, eyes half-lidded in thought. The phone rang. Not his personal line, his secured corporate channel. He tapped to answer. This is Elijah. A breath. Then a man's voice. Older, tense, rehearsed. Mr. Corrin, this is Harold Renan, chairman of Meridian Flight Services. I just wanted to extend a formal apology. I've been briefed on what occurred during boarding. Elijah didn't interrupt. I assure you, Renan continued, Trevor Lawrence's behavior does not reflect our standards. We're launching an internal investigation and… Elijah's reply came low and precise. Your systems reflect your ethics. Fix both. The silence on the other end stretched thin. Then, yes, sir. Understood. The call ended. The car passed beneath a massive digital billboard that had once displayed stock tickers. It now glitched intermittently, likely from the audit freeze rippling through financial networks like controlled detonation. Elijah's gaze remained fixed on the skyline as it began to glow faintly through the thinning clouds. Somewhere beyond those towers, board members were realizing just how far their plot had fallen. Jordan set the tablet aside. They're going to talk about this for years. Let them, Elijah said. Talking is free. But now, everyone will listen differently. A moment passed. Jordan opened his mouth to speak again but thought better of it. Elijah turned his head slightly, watching as a single beam of sunlight pierced the overcast sky and painted a sliver of gold across the highway railing. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. He didn't smile, not fully, but something in his expression softened, like steel cooling after being tempered in fire. In his mind, he saw it all again. The printer at the check-in counter, the smirk from Rusk, the quiet insult dressed as protocol. And he saw the moment it all turned. The plane, the tablet, the override. 9 minutes. Hadn't been long, but it had been enough. His thoughts folded inward, not toward victory, but toward clarity. There were still battles ahead, still rot to clear from Helion's walls, still systems to rebuild, not just in his company, but in the way power and prejudice quietly conspired beneath the surface of professionalism. Every fall, he thought, is just gravity testing character. The boardroom lights dimmed as the footage began to play. A grainy airport security video flickered across the wall-to-wall projection screen, casting pale glows on the nervous faces of the men seated around the polished walnut table. Elijah Corrin stood at the head of the room, silent, still, watching the very same executives who had tried to oust him now shift uncomfortably in their chairs. The room, once echoing with strategies whispered behind his back, now held only the weight of consequences. On the screen, Trevor Lawrence's hesitant voice could be heard through the muffled audio. I'm sorry, sir. First class is full. Then came the moment. The casual smirk of Damon Rusk as he was ushered into Elijah's rightful seat. That single frame, paused by Jordan Vale with exact timing, lingered longer than necessary. The smirk, the injustice, the quiet dignity with which Elijah had accepted the humiliation. It was all there, irrefutable. Elijah took a single step forward. Gentlemen, he said, his voice even but carved with precision. You tried to sell this company for convenience. I built it for endurance. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was heavy. A few men avoided eye contact entirely, staring at their folded hands, while others exchanged brief glances, hoping someone else would speak first. None did. Elijah slowly walked along the edge of the table, his footsteps measured, his presence inescapable. "You mistook calm for weakness," he continued, letting each word fall with deliberate weight. "You mistook silence for surrender. You were wrong on both counts." No one dared interrupt. Behind Elijah, Jordan remained by the projection console, hands clasped, watching the room like a sentinel. He'd stood beside Elijah through the chaos, and now he bore witness to the reckoning. "I don't need to lecture you on loyalty," Elijah said, stopping midway around the table. "But I will say this, Helion Dynamics was never meant to run on fear or favor. It was meant to pioneer systems that protect integrity. Starting today, we live by them." With a signal to Jordan, a second document appeared on the screen, this one cleaner, modern, and outlined in Helion's signature blue. Board Resolution 12.7 Secure Vote Initiative. Each board member's vote, Elijah explained, will now require biometric identity confirmation, time-stamped and logged across triple-chain audit trails. No more anonymous signatures. No more late-night deals buried under routine approvals. If you want to steer this company, you'll have to face what you sign. A low rustle moved through the room, men adjusting ties, clearing throats. The very tools they once used against Elijah were being restructured, fortified, and turned into safeguards for the company's soul. "And one more thing," Elijah said, his tone softening, though his eyes remained sharp, "about Trevor Larn." That name sent a ripple of tension through the room. The board remembered him, the gate attendant who denied Elijah his seat. Several men assumed punishment was coming. He was pressured, Elijah said, pushed into a decision he didn't understand, by forces he couldn't question. A few eyebrows raised. Elijah continued, "But when I confronted him, he didn't deflect. He didn't lie. He didn't protect the powerful. He admitted what he did." He paused, letting the weight of that truth settle in. Effective immediately, Trevor Larn will be offered a new position here at Helion, our first ethics compliance officer. Gasps were barely stifled. Even Jordan looked over, visibly surprised. Elijah faced the room fully now, voice steady. He made a mistake, but he faced it. That's leadership training. For a moment, no one spoke. A single cough punctuated the stillness, but otherwise, silence reigned. And in that silence, the new order settled like a gavel strike. The message was clear. Elijah Corrin hadn't come to reclaim vengeance. He had come to rebuild the standard. The same board that tried to erase him now sat in a room where transparency wasn't a proposal, it was policy. And the man who had been escorted to economy class just a day earlier was now piloting the company's future. He stepped back, allowing the final words to carry the weight of every moment that came before. "If humility can't sit in first class," Elijah concluded, "then no one deserves to." Weeks later, as camera flashes blinked like tiny stars against the glass facade of Helion's newly reopened Innovation Center, Elijah Corrin stood silently beneath a tall banner that read, "Redesigning Tomorrow." The crowd was large, shareholders, reporters, engineers, policy officials, all gathered not just to witness a ribbon cutting, but to catch a glimpse of the man who had rerouted an empire from the back of a plane. "Mr. Corrin, over here!" a journalist called out from the press line, holding up a recorder. Elijah didn't flinch. His eyes were fixed on a framed photograph just revealed on the lobby's marble wall. A single airplane wing cutting through clouds, touched by sunlight, captioned simply 9 minutes later. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. Neither was the responsibility. Behind him, Trevor Larn adjusted the mic settings at the podium, occasionally glancing toward Elijah. Once a nervous gate attendant, now Helion's freshly appointed ethics compliance officer, Trevor carried himself with quiet diligence. The crowd didn't know who he was yet, but Elijah did. Redemption often started in silence. Jordan Vale, Elijah's assistant, approached with measured steps, holding out a sleek black tablet. "Final resolution from the board," he said softly, his voice steady, but the pride in his eyes unmistakable. "You're now executive chairman. It's unanimous." Elijah took the tablet but didn't glance at the screen. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low enough that only Jordan heard, Power feels heavier when it's earned back by silence, not speeches. Jordan nodded, then looked over at the press area, where murmurs were rising. They're going to ask what happened that day, he warned. They've been circling the same question all morning. They'll get their answer, Elijah replied, but they'll get it on my terms. A few moments later, the announcer invited Elijah to the podium. As he stepped forward, the applause began, not raucous, not forced, but steady and respectful. He paused at the microphone. Cameras zoomed, pens poised. "What did you learn from that flight, Mr. Corrin?" a reporter called out. The room stilled. For a moment, Elijah didn't speak. His hand rested lightly on the podium, and he let the silence stretch just long enough to become thoughtful. "That sometimes," he began, eyes scanning the audience, "losing a seat means finding your direction." There was a ripple of silence, then nods, scribbles, camera shutters. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Behind him, Trevor finished adjusting the event's final camera feed and stepped back into the crowd, his posture straight but humble. He still hadn't told his family about his new title. He still remembered the guilt in his chest during that flight. But today, he was no longer hiding in the shadows of that moment. Jordan handed Elijah a second folder, one marked with a blue seal. Internal Systems Protocol Proposals. Elijah opened it and flipped to the page he had bookmarked earlier. Universal Fairness Safeguards, Phase 1. "Let's begin building," he said under his breath. A few feet away, one of Helion's junior engineers, barely out of university, watched the exchange, unaware that the man standing at the podium had once been forced to the back of a plane by the very system he now reformed. But Elijah wasn't here to be pitted or praised. He was here to create systems that outlived him. The speech concluded, and the press moved to the sidelines as Elijah walked down the marble steps. Outside the center's glass walls, the clouds had finally parted. The sunlight struck the banner's letters in a way that made the word tomorrow shimmer. At the base of the stage, a small boy in a school blazer approached shyly with his father. "Are you the man from the airplane story?" the boy asked. Elijah crouched to meet his gaze. "I am." The boy's father chuckled, apologizing. "He saw your story in class. Said he wanted to fly one day too." Elijah's expression softened. "Then tell him not to just fly," he said, tapping the boy's chest gently, "but to build the wings himself." He stood, nodded respectfully, and walked past the applause, the cameras, and the lingering questions. This wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about architecture, the kind of integrity that couldn't be corrupted, only cultivated. As he passed the glass wall once more, his eyes landed on the photograph again. "They denied me a seat," he whispered to himself, "but not the altitude. They tried to keep him out of first class and watched him take control of the entire airline minutes later." If you believe respect always boards first, subscribe now. Because justice doesn't wait for boarding calls. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It exposes racism, prejudice, and the swift justice that comes when truth and power reveal themselves. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage reflection on equality, accountability, and respect in professional and everyday life.